Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with the next video in the countdown towards the resumption of the Candidates Tournament, which was cut short in March because of the corona pandemic. It will all start again on Sunday, November 1st, and on Chess to Impress we're counting down by looking at the 29 earlier candidate cycles in the history of the World Championship. This is episode number 14, we're almost halfway. A quick overview of those 29 events. Zukertort and Steinitz occupied the first two places in the London 1883 tournament, which meant they played the first official World Championship match 3 years later. Steinitz gained a rematch against world champion Lasker in St. Petersburg 1895-1896, and Paul Keres from Estonia won the event in Netherlands 1938 to qualify for a match against world champion Aljechin, but World War II interfered and Keres never got a World Championship match. The first official Candidates Tournament was held in Budapest and Moscow in 1950. David Bronstein was the winner. Vasily Smyslov won two candidate cycles, Zurich 1953 and Amsterdam 1956. Misha Tal was Botvinnik's next challenger by winning the candidate cycle. And Tigran Petrosyan won Curaçao 1962 and he dethroned world champion Botvinnik the year after. Boris Spassky also won two candidate cycles, Tbilisi 1965 and Kiev 1968. And Bobby Fischer beat Tigran Petrosyan in Buenos Aires 1971 for the match of the century the year after against Boris Spassky. Karpov beat Viktor Korchnoi in Moscow 1974 to qualify for a match against world champion Fischer. Fischer did not play and Karpov became world champion by default. Viktor Korchnoi won two cycles and lost both times to Karpov. The last one is there in red because we're going to look at a game from that candidate cycle. And Garry Kasparov came on the scene by winning the next candidate cycle. In 1984 he became world champion the year after. Karpov came back, won two candidate cycles to qualify for matches 4 and 5 against Kasparov, and in 1993 it was Nigel Short who challenged Kasparov for the world title. Anand was Kasparov's next challenger and it should have been Alexei Shirov, who beat Vladimir Kramnik in Katzorla in 1998 for a match against Kasparov. That match never happened. Kramnik did get a match even though he lost to Shirov, and he became the 14th world champion in the year 2000. Leko was Kramnik's first challenger, and in 2007 a world championship tournament was held, won by Vishwanathan Anand. Aranyan, Gelfand, Grishuk and Leko qualified for that tournament. Topalov, Gelfand and Carlsen were Anand's next three opponents. Carlsen became the 16th world champion. Anand came back for a rematch against Carlsen. Carlsen won again, and Karyakin and Caruana were Carlsen's last two opponents in a world championship match. So who will it be? It will all start very soon. Yekaterinburg 2020 will decide who will be allowed to challenge Magnus Carlsen for the world title. As mentioned in this video, we're looking at the cycle from 1979 till 1981. Two interzonals were held, the first one in Manila on the Philippines in 1979, and the three top players there in green qualified for the candidate matches. Misha Tal, Lev Polugayevsky and Andras Adorjan. On a tiebreak against his compatriot Zoltan Ripley. As you can see, both players finished on 11 points, but Adorjan had a better tiebreak. From the Rio de Janeiro interzonal, also three players qualified, Lajos Portis, Tigran Petrosyan and Robert Hübner. Jan Timman just missed out. The candidates matches were held in 1980 and 1981. Viktor Korchnoi, the loser of the last championship match, and Boris Spassky, the loser of the last candidates final, were seeded directly into the tournament and joined the top three from each of the two interzonals. And this is the bracket of the candidate matches. Korchnoi beat Petrosyan, Polugayevsky beat Tal. Portis and Spassky drew their match 7-0. Portis was declared the winner because he had won more games with the black pieces. Hübner beat Adorjan, and I know I am butchering the pronunciation of that Hungarian grandmaster's name. Somebody once explained to me how to pronounce it, but I forgot. In the semi-finals, Korchnoi beat Polugayevsky and Hübner beat Portis. The final was very strange. Viktor Korchnoi beat Robert Hübner, but the candidates final was supposed to be over 16 games. But after 10 games, of which 8 were completed and 2 were adjourned, Hübner forfeited the match, and Viktor Korchnoi was once again the challenger of world champion Anatoly Karpov. And he lost to Karpov later that year by 6 points to 2 in a match held in Merano in Italy. In this video we're going to look at a game from the semi-finals, where Viktor Korchnoi narrowly beat Lev Pologoyevsky. After 13 games, the score was 6.5, 6.5. Let's see what happened in game 14. The match was supposed to be over 12 games, but after 12 games the score was 6-all. And instead of a tiebreak with rapid and blitz games as we see nowadays, it was decided that 2 more games needed to be played, and if the score would still be even, then 2 more games. And only then the player with most wins with black, which was Viktor Korchnoi in this case, would win the match. So after 12 games it was 6-all. In game 13, Korchnoi with the white pieces narrowly was able to make a draw. And in game 14 it was Lev Pologoyevsky with the white pieces, Viktor Korchnoi on the black side. Knight f3 from Pologoyevsky, knight f6, c4 and c5. And it was a surprise because b6 had been played by Korchnoi in his earlier black games in this match, leading to a Queen's Indian opening. But c5 was his choice in this crucial game. Knight c3, d5, c takes, knight takes and e4. A popular move at the time, explains Garry Kasparov in his comments on this game in his book My Great Predecessors. I'm using Kasparov's comments for this video. The knight is attacked, it went to b4, bishop c4 and knight d3 check. And now I have to read something from you from Kasparov's book. It is from Korchnoi's press officer Emanuel Stein. The decisive 40th game began on Sunday at 4 p.m. Again we had the black pieces. What opening should be chosen? Korchnoi, with his coaches Grandmaster Steen and Sarawan, had been up all night polishing a sharp line of play in the English opening, where black checks with his knight at d3, as we now see on the board, and white loses the chance to castle. The variation was risky, but Korchnoi was counting on the element of surprise. If his opponent played the old way, we would spring on him, an improvement found by Michael Steen. At the same time, the Hübner-Portisch match, the other semi-finals of the World Championship, was being played in Italy, and Bent Larsen was there as correspondent for the Argentine newspaper Clarín. When I went out for the newspapers the next morning and opened Clarín, I was dumbfounded. There was the entire variation, in full. It turned out that it had been played in a game between Hübner and Portisch the previous day, which ended in a draw. But Larsen, who was very familiar with this line of play, showed how black could have improved. But before that he showed an improvement for white, an unpleasant surprise. When I returned to the hotel room, they were of course sitting there preparing. I showed them the newspaper, producing near panic. We didn't know what to do and were close to despair. Viktor and I went for a stroll, and at one point I said, "There's only one way out. You have to stake your all." Serov, the leader of the Soviet delegation, is unlikely to read Spanish, nor is he likely to buy newspapers for hard currency. As for the embassy, they won't send the papers until tomorrow. After all, it's a Sunday. Viktor was lost in thought. Finally the game began, and Korchnoi chose that very line of play. I said to them, "Relax." Indeed, the critical position in that line of play comes somewhere on the 14th or 15th move. It was either or. I watched Viktor rush off the stage and pace about in his cage-like restroom. He was waiting, like a beast in ambush, waiting to pounce. Of course Pologoyevsky didn't know about the newspaper, and it was effectively all over in 10 minutes. And a couple of days later, Larsen wrote a piece in Clarín under the heading, "Those who don't read Larsen land in trouble." A very long quote, but I thought it was very entertaining and amusing, and it shows how different things were without social media. Nowadays it is impossible to even contemplate a top player not knowing about another top game in a candidates match having been played the day before. Okay, we're on move 6, knight d3 check. The king has to play, knight f4 check. The king has to go to f1 to protect the g2 pawn, and knight back to e6. Kasparov says this knight maneuver was considered to be inadequate because of the following pawn sacrifice. But Portisch and also Korchnoi and Steen worked out a new plan for black. And here it is, b4, and that is indeed a pawn sacrifice. Korchnoi took on b4, and knight d5 from Polegaevsky. Grandmaster Makarichev writes, white seizes space, develops his c1 bishop on a splendid diagonal, and apparently gains very good prospects. But Portisch was able to overcome this optical illusion and re-evaluate the upcoming positions. Yes, this bishop is going to the long diagonal, as Makarichev explains. But here comes that novelty that both Portisch as well as Korchnoi and Steen found, g7, g6. Kasparov writes, this discovery virtually overturned the evaluation of the position. Black solves the problems of his kingside development, and in the resulting Grunfeld-type setups, it is white who has to play accurately, since his predominance in the center does not compensate for the drawbacks of his king's position on f1. So g6 is that novelty, and Polegaevsky did not know it, even though it had been in the newspaper that same day. The article by Bent Larsen in the Clarín newspaper. Let's follow the game. Bishop b2 as planned on the long diagonal. Bishop g7. The bishops were swapped, and knight takes b4, winning the pawn back. Now black has to be careful. Don't play bishop g4 straight away, because then there is a well-known tactic. If you want to put the video on pause and have a look, how can white refute that bishop g4, which was played one move too early? Yes, the classical bishop takes f7 check is possible here, because after king takes, there is either knight e5 check or knight g5 check, attacking the bishop. The black king is in check, and white will win the piece back with interest. So Korchnoi has to play accurately. After knight takes b4, he first castles. d2, d4. Kasparov writes, it is strange, but both Hübner and Polegaevsky were let down by their sense of danger. The move in the game looks natural, but it allows the opponent to make an immediate attack on white's center. And although this is not yet finally catastrophic, it was far more circumspect to play 14 h3 with equality, as recommended by Larsen and many other commentators. So h3 should have been played here. But d4 was played, and now bishop g4, and it is Grandmaster Makarichev who says, here Polegaevsky thought for 30 minutes. Indeed, things are not at all easy for white. In fact, he has a bad Grunfeld, with his knight already pinned on f3. The game goes on. King e2 was played by Polegaevsky after half an hour, while in the other game, Hübner played queen d2. That was Hübner's choice in the match against Portisch the day before. And after many adventures, he saved the game to a draw. King e2 was Polegaevsky's choice. Queen d6 gets an exclamation mark from Kasparov. It's attacking that knight. So queen d2 to defend the knight. Knight e6. Attacking the d4 pawn twice. It's really only defended by the queen because the knight is pinned. And also knight f4 check is an unpleasant move. So Polegaevsky has to give up the bishop for the knight. Bishop takes e6. Queen takes and king e3. Kasparov writes, this move has its logic. White is now threatening knight e5. Despite everything, white fights for the initiative. Even so, this is a mistake which aggravates white's difficulties. Of course, Polegaevsky realized that it was bad to move his king into the center, but he wanted to eliminate the pin of the knight. Black's unexpected novelty obviously upset his mental equilibrium. And Korchnoi plays a very energetic move, f7, f5. Kasparov likes that move. Queen d3, f takes, queen takes, and king takes. The queens are swapped, and knight d7. Kasparov says play has gone into an ending that is difficult for white. In addition, Polugieski only had 10 minutes left for 19 moves. Here rook h to c1 was played by Polugieski on the 22nd move. Knight d5 is the alternative, which is the only way of retaining chances to save the game, activating the badly placed knight. Kasparov says white had already lost heart, because rook h to c1 is not a good move. Rook f5 from Korchnoi, a very unpleasant move, preparing both knight d7 to f6 to d5, as well as doubling the rooks on the f-file, explains Kasparov. Despite the absence of queens, the position has not lost its middle game features. There are still plenty of pieces on the board, and black's chances of creating threats to the white king are far from exhausted, to say nothing about an attack on the weak white pawns. Always nice to get an explanation in words from Kasparov instead of in variations. Rook c7 was played by Polugieski, attacking the knight, knight f6 check, king d3. It's important to note that king e3 is not possible, because then there is a fork. You first kick the knight away with a5, knight d3, and then there is knight d5 check, forking king and rook, so the king cannot go to e3. The king went to d3, a5 anyway, knight c2, knight d5 as planned, attacking the rook, rook takes b7, knight f4 check, king e4, and knight takes g2. And now this knight on f3 is hanging. It's attacked twice and only defended by the king. So knight e5, rook f4 check, king d5, the king is really exposed there, and bishop f5, exclamation mark, attacking the knight on c2, which is unprotected, and there is no defense against the double threats of taking that knight, and also bishop e4 with a skewer. Black wins a piece, explains Kasparov, and we'll see how that happens. Kasparov also shows that rook b2 here does not work, because of rook takes f2, attacking the knight on c2 once more. It's now attacked twice, only defended once. So rook c1 has to be played, but then rook c8, attacking that poor knight a third time. You can still play knight c6 to avoid losing the knight on c2, but then there is knight f4 check, king c5, and knight d3 check, and we have a fork after all on a lot of pieces. Nice variation. So after bishop f5, we just saw that rook back to b2 does not work. Polugieski played rook c7 instead, rook d8 check, forces the king to the e-file, and then this knight on c2 will be lost after all. The king has to go to the c-file, and now the rook is no longer protecting the knight, so bishop takes c2 is a full piece in the bag for black. The remaining moves were played in time trouble. We'll see that Polugieski first wins a few pawns back for the piece, but it doesn't save him. Let's look at the remaining moves. Knight c6 is move 32, attacking the rook, rook e8, and now white wins a pawn on e7. With check, king f8, knight back to c6, rook f5 check, knight e5 interposing, knight f4, and there goes a second pawn. White has 2 pawns for the piece, but he's still totally lost. King g8 attacking the rook, rook back to d7, knight d3 check, king b6, knight takes e5, d takes e5, and rook e takes e5. That wins another pawn for black. Rook c1, rook f6 check, king a7, and there goes another pawn. And in this simplified position, with an extra bishop for black, and with the time control having been reached, here Polugieski resigned. Viktor Korchnoi won the match in extra time and qualified for the final, where, as we just saw, he beat Robert Hübner and qualified for another World Championship match with Anatoly Karpov. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, that you'll give it a thumbs up, that you'll subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and that you'll leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you like the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter and on Facebook. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching. Say thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching.